Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and it's such a pleasure to be here tonight, live in person, isn't it? Like, you know, to be out of COVID lockdown and have a drink in a small bar and talk about data, you know? Isn't that just so delicious? And I got to say, like, Stitch Bar is one of my favourite bars in Sydney, and so when they approached me to speak, I said, only if it's a whiskey bar in Sydney, and then they said Stitch Bar. I said, yep, okay, I'll do that. So Stitch Bar, I'll let you in on a secret. I've had many a dusty night at this place, particularly in that nook room around the corner, you know, talking about data, of course, you know. So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk about what I see in the world of data, tell some stories. And I want to congratulate the City of Sydney and the University of Sydney for hosting this event. As I said, Raise the Bar is an event that's global, and Sydney is one of 10 cities around the world that hosts this. And it started back in 2014 in New York City, when a group of people had the vision of bringing people together to learn something new in unconventional places like local bars. So who would have thought the combination of people, alcohol, talking, small bar would be just a delicious cocktail, right? Amen, you say. So I do congratulate you all for being part of this, and you will learn something, hopefully. We won't end in a dusty night, maybe I will after this, but yeah, so thank you for coming out. So my name is Elisa Choi, and yes, people do call me the DataWhisperer, because I translate maths to English to turn data into decisions. So decisions that guide businesses to navigate change. So, you know, as much as I am a self-proclaimed queen of data, I'm also the queen of analogies and metaphors. So I will be peppering them throughout the talk tonight, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So what I want to say is that we are in the 21st century. We have so much data around us. We are literally swimming in oceans and oceans of data. And we have technology today that can process this information so fast, so efficiently to answer a lot of really cool questions. And some of those things lend to predictions. And so what I'm going to share with you tonight is an opportunity for you to hear some of my predictions on some of these big ticket events and topics, the change the world stuff. So welcome. We are going to immerse ourselves into the world of data. We're going to be talking about how data can change the world one byte at a time. So for the next 30 minutes, I invite you to sit back, relax, sip and listen as we immerse ourselves and dive into the oceans of data. Now, before I do that, I am going to take a sip myself, and I've got Tim handing me my high-performance drink, which is a whiskey sour, compliments of Irish Neil. Thank you very much. Delicious. Okay, so we can't talk about data without first understanding what data is. And I'm going to keep it very, very simple. So data is essentially information that can be stored for electronic purposes for analysis. So you'll all be aware of data in the form of the good old Excel table, right? Rows and columns of numbers and text in Excel, or even words in an email or a document. Now, data comes in many forms, so there's numbers, there's text, there's images, there's videos. You know, so much of this stuff sits outside on the internet, in websites, blogs, and social media. And some of it sits in businesses that's collected in their systems. So we are literally surrounded by so much data. But what does that really mean? Well, 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. So that's a stat by IBM back in 2015. So we are amassing so much data faster and faster as we speak. We are literally swimming or drowning in oceans of data. But what does that really mean? Well, that's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day. What's a quintillion? Well, let's go to a gigabyte. A gigabyte is 1 billion bytes of data. And a gigabyte, 1 billion, is 1 with 9 zeros. So it's 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Now, a quintillion is 1 with 18 zeros, which is a heck of a lot of data. So every day, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is being created. So to put that into perspective, that's 100 million Blu-ray DVD discs. And so to put that into perspective, if you stack them all along each other, they would fit 80 Olympic-sized swimming pools a day. Blows your mind, right? So most of this data actually sits outside businesses, right? So businesses collect data in their systems. So you would be familiar with sales data, product data, customer data, property data, asset data, HR data, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of data that businesses collect, and I call that very simply internal data. But the vast majority of the oceans of data that we're talking about here is outside businesses on the internet. You know, so you've got the websites, blogs, and social media. So Facebook alone generates a couple of petabytes of data a day, right? So there is so much data being created. And this is the world that I play in every day. I swim in this. I data dive every day to find nuggets of gold to predict the market. And we're going to share some of the insights and the predictions that we've actually been able to make using big data and AI. So before I go on, does anyone have any questions about what data is? No. No? Great. So how do we process so much of this data? Well, basically, it's technology. We are in the 21st century. So I'm going to talk about AI. So we are at this point in our lives where we've got so much computing power, right, and advanced analytics coming together, right, with the oceans of data around us to process this information at speed and accurately. And we can answer so many interesting questions, including save the world questions, which I'll share with you later tonight. So when I'm talking about AI, it's artificial intelligence. It's artificial because it's done by machines, and it's intelligent because it's far more accurate than humans. And the world that I work in within AI is called machine learning. And within machine learning, there is natural language processing, which is essentially another way of saying computational linguistics, which is another way of saying computers understanding language, okay? So computational linguistics has actually been around since the 1950s. It's nothing new, right? Mathematical algorithms understanding relationships between numbers has been around for a long time too. But now we've got the beautiful nexus of technology, data, coming together to make the maths work really fast to answer really cool questions, which I can't wait to share. So as you can tell, I love working in this space because every day at Maven Data, we get the privilege of mining this information, mostly online content. That's the world that I work in, market data, external data. That's the world where we go and use AIs, NLP, to understand the market, putting a finger on the pulse of market trends and predicting future behaviour. Now, how do I do that? Well, we understand emotion because we know that humans make decisions based on emotion. We're not rational. Like when I bought these Jimmy Choo heels for $1,000, that was not rational. It was purely emotional. And I'm wearing them tonight to get ROI on these bad boys because, so we make decisions by emotions. And so when we're able to measure emotion, right, then we're able to understand human behaviour and predict human behaviour. Because the major premise is that emotions drive behaviour, but strong emotions change behaviour. So if you love something, you're going to do something. If you hate something, you're going to do something. If you mildly kind of like something or you kind of find something annoying, you don't really change your behaviour. Like if you love the iPhone, you're going to camp outside the Apple store the night before in the cold, in the rain, because you love the iPhone, right? So we're looking at understanding human emotions, which drives people's behaviour. So when we pick that up through NLP, right, and using the world's online content on the internet, what I do every day is analyse millions of behavioural interactions of how you and I engage with content online every single day in the privacy of our own digital screens. So what that means is we can understand what we all deeply care about, what really matters. And then when we measure the pulse of the emotions, we can actually measure sentiment. And when we pick up intense sentiment, that's when we can signal a change in future behaviour. So that's super exciting stuff. And this is how you can change the world. Now, imagine we've got this ability now to use big data and AI to do what I've just said. So it connects businesses and governments closer to the market. Simple, right? So if every business knew what the future trend of the market was, And if every government knew what the issues of their constituents were, then they would theoretically be able to, you know, offer products and services and policies that meets the needs of the people, right? Simple, pretty simple. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. The reality right now is that for some of the big ticket questions that change the world stuff, which is what we're going to focus on, government policy, the major source of data that they use is polls. So when I talk about a poll or a survey or a focus group, right, a poll is essentially getting a group of people together to ask a few questions about how they think, how they feel about the future. Will they do this? Will you take the COVID vaccine? Etc., etc. Now, a poll can be anywhere from 100 people to 3,000 people or more, right? So polling data gets used to shape policy. But to put that in perspective, 3,000 people right now every week are being polled about whether they'll take the COVID vaccine, right? The government relies on that information to shape how they talk about it and how they campaign and engage with the market. Now, 3,000 people to represent a population of 25 million people, which includes babies, because babies have opinions too. 25 million, that's less than 1% of the population. It's actually 0.012% of the population. Doesn't that just sound like nonsense? Because it is. So, to put that into perspective, it's like saying, you know, I want to measure the temperature of Warringamba Dam, which is one of the major dams that feeds this water supply to Sydney and New South Wales. Warringamba Dam is 4 times the size of Sydney Harbour. So that's a lot of water. So if you were asked to measure the temperature of Warringamba Dam and you were to take a poll of 3,000 people, that would just be like saying take 3 buckets of water from Warringamba Dam. Doesn't make sense, right? But we still do it. That's the reality. And it frustrates me. It really frustrates me. So, so we're at this point now where, you know, polls are a major source of data and insights that shape policy. And I guess it's no wonder why you kind of notice that governments seem a bit disconnected from the people. They just never seem to either, I don't know, to listen, or maybe they do but they don't listen, but whatever it is, there's a disconnect because they're using the wrong data and the wrong methods, right? And even with elections, it's always used in elections. So give me an election in the last 10 years, a major election around the world that has gotten a poll right. Remember 2016? Trump and Clinton? Everybody thought that Clinton was going to win by a landslide, right? And she didn't. Epic fail. 2019, in our own federal election here in Australia, all the polls said that Labor was going to win by a landslide. That didn't happen. Epic fail. And in 2020, in the recent US presidential election, had the same story. We thought Biden was going to win by a landslide. Now, he did win, but it was by no means a landslide, was it? Do you remember in the first week after polling day, we were all watching with trepidation as the results were coming through, and we were all thinking Trump actually has a chance? It was so nail-biting, wasn't it? I lost my nails at the end of the week. So, you know, there are so many points to say that polls don't work, particularly when it comes to policy, which is change the world material, isn't it? Because governments forming policy, you know, policy decisions, they impact a wide-ranging, you know, population. So what I'm going to focus on tonight is sharing some of the nuggets that I've been seeing, some of these change the world policy topics. So, before I go on to that, does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay, perfect. So we're going to spend the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you, you know, some of the predictions that we've made using the method that we've described. Because I can hear you now going, okay, Elisa, you talk a big game, blah, 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 show us the data. Show me the data. I'm like, okay, I'm glad you asked. So, so we've applied this methodology many times, right, across culture, across politics and elections and industry. So I'm going to share some of these things. So in 2019, we applied Maven data methodology, which is using big data and AI to measure emotions and predict human behaviour. We were able to predict the winner of the voice competition in 2019, and then we did it again in 2020, and then we predicted the winner of MasterChef Australia in 2020, And then back in January 2018, we were looking at climate change. And we predicted the rise of the young people's voice, the sentiment amongst young people towards climate change. Now, what have you here? Like, you know, within 15 months, we had the rise of Greta Thunberg. And we also had, in Australia, 10,000 school children strike for climate change in May 2019. And Scott Morrison said, go back to school, right? So we picked that up back in January 2018. So we had the school children strike, and then that was followed by the global climate change strike, where we had 400,000 people in Australia protest for climate change in September 2019. We also obviously looked at the US presidential election. So we were able to predict the outcome of 7 of 9 key battleground states in the Trump versus Biden election, right? And the first state to fall was Florida. Everybody thought that Trump, right? It was Trump or Biden. Do you remember that? It was the big state. As soon as that fell, it's like, holy, Trump's got a chance. So we actually called that Trump was going to win. So we did that. What else have we done? Oh, here in Australia, just last month, we predicted the rise of the female voice. We predicted, you know, we are really on the precipice of a revolution, given the analysis that we've been doing on workplace bullying and sexual harassment that's, you know, spreading through, plaguing our workplace cultures. So 10 days before the March for Justice event, we were predicting that there was going to be a lot of movement. People were going to change their behaviour, which was literally get out and protest. So in Australia, we had, how many? 100,000 people attend the March for Justice event, of which I was one of them. And you imagine, right, for every one person that actually attended the event, there would have been countless others that wished they could follow, but they couldn't get out of work or whatever reason. So, you know, it was a huge event, right? People changed their behaviour. We picked up the emotion 10 days earlier. So we've also applied this to industry, right? So last year we did a major study on global wellness trends. So we were looking at, right, what are the key trends that are going to change the market in the world of wellness, which is a $4.5 trillion industry, set to grow about 10% per annum, right? So we tested 200 of the world's expert trends against the market, and we found 10 transformational trends, which means that they are going to move the market and they're going to come to our shores within the next 12 months. One of them I'm going to share with you tonight is the link between gut health and wellness. So now the market is ready to connect gut health to their wellness. So what have we seen? Well, in the data based on supermarket data, we've been able to see that for one product alone, kombucha, we saw 10.9% increase in the sale of kombucha, which is just a product playing on the theme of gut health and wellness. I drink gallons of kombucha every day, so I attest to that trend. But the interesting thing is, when you put that into perspective, kombucha is just fermented tea. And we buy it for $4 or $6, depending if it's on sale at Coles, $4 to $6 a litre, right? And then you go, well, petrol is $1.20 a litre. And we have to scour the earth to find, whatever makes oil. It's not my domain of expertise. And then they have to dig it out and process it and transport it and store it, and then goes to the Bowser at $1.20 a litre. And I'm paying $6 a litre for fermented tea. So it goes to show, right? The data was very clear in saying that there's strong sentiment and movement for people to connect gut health and wellness. So imagine applying this sort of power to know the future. If you were a business or a government and you're able to put your finger on the pulse of the market, you could get ahead of the curve and actually meet the market with what they need and want, right? So that to me is super exciting. That's how we change the world. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to offer you a choice of what we're going to talk about next. I'm going to give you 3 choices of topics, and they're all change the world stuff that we've been looking at Maven Data. It's a choose your own adventure. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you what the topics are, and then you can have some time to think about it while I sip my cocktail, and then we're going to take a vote. And this is the only time I condone a poll or a vote. Okay? So the first topic is, COVID vaccine. Is Australia going to take the COVID vaccine? When are we going to get out of the country, right? Are we going to reach herd immunity? That's topic number one. Super juicy, I love it. Super topical. Number two, the Australian economy. What does the public feel? What's the sentiment towards the Australian economy right now? Are we headed towards an iceberg? Now this will appeal to those who are economists and macro thinkers, and it's quite cerebral. I like this topic too. The third topic is Prime Minister Scott Morrison. If there was an election called, say, tomorrow, would he win? And this is also really juicy. So I'm going to give you some time to have a think about which of the three topics you'd like me to share my predictions on, and then we're going to take a vote. So I'm going to take a sip. I'll give you like 10 seconds. Oh my goodness, this is why polls don't work. How are we going to... Okay, so those 6 people who voted for number 1, you're going to have to rethink now and vote for number 2 or 3. So let's just do a recount, and this time, when you vote, you're going to have to be really loud because I'm a bit deaf. So, let's go. Number 2, Australian economy. Number 3, Scott Morrison. Oh, this is so hard.
Number two.
Oh, you know what? I'm feeling quite generous tonight. Why don't we talk about both of them? Eh? Well, do we have time? What is the time? 26. Oh, we got heaps of time. Okay. All right. So the first topic we're going to talk about is Australian economy. I honestly didn't think anyone would take that one, to be honest. I was like, I don't think anyone cares. Okay, so we have been looking at the Australian economy daily since late last year, or September last year. So what we've been doing is measuring sentiment of the general public in Australia in English language, and essentially looking at all the content, what's engaging, what's deeply relevant and important, and looking at the overall sentiment through emotions, right? It's a shame that I can't show you any visuals because there's a lot of visualization that I could express and tell you in the picture, but now I have to bloody describe it. So when it comes to the Australian economy, as you can imagine, it's gone through lots of ebbs and flows. And it's, there's lots of topics that are really part of this sentiment for the Australian economy. It's gone from fear, anxiety, to joy, belonging, expectation. It's like the tides of an ocean, really. So it's been really interesting because lots of things have been impacting the Australian economy narrative. And as you know, last year was very different to this year. It was like, leading into Christmas, people were feeling quite high expectations and hope, as we always do towards the end of the year. There was I can't wait for 2020 to end, so 2021 could be normal again. We weren't told it's not normal at all. And then we also had things like, the COVID vaccine is going to come. We had, generally people were still on JobKeeper and JobSeeker. There was a lot of, people were generally riding nicely, right? But come early 2021, we started to see some shifts downwards, like people starting to get a bit anxious about, there's that geopolitical issue with China, which, really irks a lot of business people. We've also got the COVID vaccine being rolled out, and then cases overseas where, AstraZeneca and, Pfizer and all that were kind of having issues with side effects. You've got the economic data coming through every quarter, right? And you've also got the governments, having their commentary on how the economy's going. So what I've found is that in the last week, it's been going up and down, up and down, up and down. But in the last week, we saw a massive spike in sentiment, positive sentiment, like a huge, if I could show you the chart, it'd be so much easier, but essentially it goes wobble, 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 shoot up into the sky, 4 times the size of the last 4 wobbles. And to me, that was really interesting because we right now, in general, feel quite positive about the Australian economy. And I look at why. Well, we've got some really good economic data coming through. We've got unemployment rates have come down. Things are generally good, despite the fact that we've got the COVID vaccine rollout being delayed. It seems like people feel comfortable with the government of the day handling matters. And what was really interesting, coincidentally, is that when I looked at the ASX, the stock market, sentiments, that the big spike in sentiment that we picked up in the last month also correlated with a spike in the ASX. So it goes to show that, we are driven by emotions, even in stock, placing bets in stocks. But it also shows that in the last couple of days, that spike has come down. So we're very sensitive and we can change really quickly, which is why methods like this are able to pick up sentiment shifts, because then you can make decisions about what's going on, why, etc. So in my view, the current sentiment of the Australian economy is that we're generally very happy with how things are going. So based on that data, you feel like you're safe to call an election for the government. What I also notice is that based on why people are feeling that way, we're all kind of backward looking still. We're all patting ourselves on the back based on historical data and results. We're not really looking forward far yet, because there are those big questions around what's the vision of the Australian economy? Like, where are we going to get our money from if we're shifting from, coal or towards clean energy? Where is that? JobKeeper has finished, so the last economic data that came out in March was coinciding with the end of JobKeeper. So we haven't really seen the impact of JobKeeper or the loss of JobKeeper in the economy, which still hits a lot of our major industries, which is, hospitality and tourism. We've also closed our borders, and because of the rollout of vaccine is delayed, right? What are we going to do about the $60 billion in international tourism that we're missing out? What are we going to do about migration and skilled migrants not able to come to our shores because we've closed our borders? So there's a lot of these sort of forward-looking questions that haven't really surfaced up to the public market's, sentiment. So it raises an interesting point to me that we really are a function of what the media says, and we really are a function of what the government says. Now, I'm talking about, when we're doing this analysis, we don't look at individual people. We look at the entire population of people, right? So we don't know that it's Jane from Bondi who sips pina coladas on a weekend feels this way. We're looking at the cohort of people who engage with content online, and then we measure that, which is why we're a strategic market research agency. We're not tactical. So what that says is, though, as a general population, what I'm seeing is that we are very much reliant on what the media says and what the government says. And so when they say things are good, then we're like, okay, things are good, right? I'll probably say that this population of people who've attended this event tonight are probably more educated and more interested in the world. But when you think about the vast population of mainstream heartland Australia that probably don't think about these things, that's where the influence of media and the government really play a hand. So that's where we pick up the general sentiment is A-OK. However, my personal view is that we're going to hit an iceberg. I do believe that. And I feel that at some point in time in this year, people are going to realise, and then there's going to be a bit of panic. I do feel that. Because it's going to come. That data's going to come. So that's my talk on my sharing of insights. Doom and gloom. Great. Okay, let's... Does anyone have any questions on that one before we move on? Oh, here we go. Yes.
Great. How do you normalise for voices on social media that may disproportionately weight based on certain type of population? Say, for example, I'm talking like vaccines. I think like anti-vaxxers are typically more loud than pro-vaxxers. So how do we account for that when we're trying to create like an idea about what sentiment is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So just to relay the question, how do you normalise for voices that are louder on social media, like anti-vaxxers are louder than non-anti-vaxxers, yeah?
Yeah.
So the beauty about what we do is that we include social media in our data, but the way we tackle that is that we actually test whether anti-vaxxers are relevant and have a voice. Just because you're a person with a microphone speaking very loudly doesn't mean people listen to you. So that's where, I guess, the social media metrics fail, because things like followers and likes, etc., are very surface level indicators of engagement. You don't really know why, etc., etc. So in that sense, our method already normalizes for that because, it doesn't matter how many views or likes or shares a particular topic has or an article. It's about how the intrinsic value of that article relates to the topic in a mathematical way, which is done across the board. So most of the content that we analyse online is actually noise, not important. 93% of stuff that we analyse is noise, meaning that all this stuff that's on the internet, we don't actually care about. And we actually care about a small number of things deeply, and that's what we pick up on. So in that sense, I hope that answers your question.
How do you get to the weightings about what you care about and what you don't care about?
Well, that's the secret sauce. Good question though, don't we all want to know that question? How does Google's algorithm really work? Don't we all want to know that question? It's a good question, yes. We had some other questions. That was his question?
Yeah, more or less.
More or less, okay. All right. So we're going to move on. Oh, he was one, yes.
Is there a correlation between parts of your analysis are social media and another part comes from regular media, although it's digitized? So the question is, does it happen, have you ever tried to see if there's a correlation between what the media says, like leading correlation between what the regular media says and what the social media says? Say, for example, Sydney Morning Herald prints, Scott Morrison has done something wrong, let's say, and the internet goes, yeah, he did. Is this the kind of feedback that you may have looked into at some point? Sorry. Did I say?
Yeah. So your question is
was
that.
I clear?
Is your question?
My question is about whether, in fact, what you're picking up is primarily dictated by the journalists in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Because the internet actually follows, or does it? It might not. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. So the question is the influence on media and the correlation with social media. So that with the question being that if you're an influential media outlet, if you say something in social media, it gets yeah, okay. So that's similar to the first question, which is when we assess importance of issues and how we analyse content and how we engage with online, we're measuring like millions of behavioural interactions of humans and how they engage with online, and there's many, many things that go into that. And then we measure the emotions. There's 400 emotions we measure. So just because you're a powerful media outlet, and when I say powerful, it means you've got a lot of audience, like your mastheads that are really big, it doesn't mean that what you're saying will be heard and engaged with in our way we look at the world. So what I mean by that is it's not so much about how loud your voice is or how many people look at your article. It's about the intrinsic content of that article, that one article, which is part of many, many articles and pieces of content related to a topic, and how that works and how we make an assessment of, is this topic important or not? So it's not so much about SMH being weighted more than, say, Canberra Times. It's really about the content and how this is the smarts of natural language processing, because it's got nothing to do with what we call volumetric metrics, which is like how many audience views, how many clicks and shares. It's not about that. It's really about understanding and contextualizing that content. And if you can visualize something here, we're now all going to be in space. We're floating in space. And content online is just constantly being served up into space. Now, when we're looking at, say, the Australian economy, we would be pulling all content in space, the 2.5 quintillion bytes of data that's created every day. We'd be pulling all content related to that and then understanding the context of what's being discussed in relation to that to form a narrow graphic, which is like an orb with other little bubbles, and they connect like a molecule. That's kind of what it looks like if you were to present the mathematical relationships into a 3D visual. right?
Orbs we did.
Orbs, yeah,
Orbs
orbs and molecules.
Yes.
So what we found is that when you do this analysis thousands and thousands of times, there's a common shape to these, I'm going to call it orb molecules, right? So there's 4 distinct classifications of these molecules, and they all behave in the same way. And so when we classify whether something's important, two types of shapes are important, and the other 2 types are not important. And that's the 93% that is noise. I hope that makes sense. Yeah? Yeah? You've got another question. Yes.
When it comes to the well, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to use this, but it sounds weird. So when it comes to decide things like measuring the sentiment of the people towards Australian economy, for example, this is a little bit abstract. So what is how is this decision how is the decision of which parameters weight more than others? I know it's a little bit more like your question, but like, yeah, but who is the person who takes these decisions? Like you have like sort of like a department who is in charge of this, another consultant?
All right, we're coming back to like, everybody wants to know how it works, right? If I had a penny every time someone asked me that question, I wouldn't need to be talking. So it's a good question. So the question was obviously who weights? Yeah. Well, when you work in the world of data, right? It's about science, and it's art and science. So there's obviously humans who make the decision about where we draw the line of the different types of orb molecules, right? So how we calibrate that is that when we were looking at testing brands. So there's a global interbrand index that gets released every year, which gives you the top 100 brands as, described as the most valuable brands in the world. Now, valuable brands means it's got brand equity. What does that really mean? It means it's relevant. It means it's, generally making a lot of money. It's part of society. It's something that is, highly valuable, right, to culture. And you got your likes of Apple and Nike and, McDonald's, all those sorts of brands have high brand equity. So when we calibrated our system, we looked at testing the top 100 brands, right? 90% of those brands we defined as relevant. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. If I knew how to build that machine, wouldn't that be amazing? If I knew how to, I'm not smart enough to build that machine, but what I do is translate the output into actionable insights, because, it's like having a Porsche in the garage. If nobody knows how to drive the thing, it's still sitting there in the garage. So I drive the Porsche and I take people from A to B. I have no idea how it's built under the hood. I mean, I could try, but I'm not a PhD in computer science or maths or physics. That really would break my brain. So yeah, and it's a good question though. Yeah. Have we got any more under the hood questions? Oh, here we go. Matt.
So we've had a few discussions about it, and I think the way that from what I've seen, it's a lot about influence networks and figuring out where ideas come from, and based on the networks of ideas and how they propagate through networks, you can figure out who actually has power over forming narrative. So it's sort of getting into that language bit, but then getting into network analysis at massive scale, if that makes sense. So I mean, for me, that's where you don't actually have to weight it so much. You're sort of following the breadcrumbs of how ideas propagate through the internet, which is super cool.
So can you give me an example of that?
Sorry. So yeah, giving Elisa a break. So let's say you're looking at an election or something, right? And you're thinking about perceptions of a certain person, and you're thinking about certain, let's say gossip arises about one of the candidates. If you look at everywhere on the internet, you can find where that gossip started, and you can trace who picked up that gossip and how it propagated through to major news and all that kind of stuff. And if you do that often enough, you can start figuring out the patterns of how ideas propagate through the media and through online data. So I think that's the thing. You can only do that with ridiculous scale and some pretty spooky mathematics and stuff, right? which is why I'm such a fan. So, yeah.
Matt's a client, so he understands what we do with him. So thank you, Matt. That's a great explanation. Any other questions? Oh, here we go. Yep. Do you want to shout, or you want to come up to here? I'll bring my shoes over to you.
Sorry, I can't shout. I'll just stand back here. My question is about, you've talked about prediction, about using data to predict behaviour and sentiment. So I guess, what about the next step, which is modification? Do you dabble in the world of, if we know how people are going to behave, are there things we can do or information we can share to change the way people behave? So hopefully for benevolent causes like, preventing climate change and things like that. But is that something that you've ever had the chance to look at, and what can you say about that?
I'm so glad somebody asked me that question, because that comes down to the application of what we do. Sorry about that. So the question relates to, when you say modification, you mean influencing people based on what we predict their future behaviour is. Okay. This actually lends quite well to the COVID vaccine conversation that nobody voted for, by the way. 6 people voted for. Well, you 6 people can now listen, and the rest of you can take a sip of your drink. So when we were looking at the COVID vaccine, right, and the question was, how does the public feel about the COVID vaccine? Will they take the COVID vaccine when it's available? So we were testing the narrative of vaccine hesitancy, and we're working with a major university on this. Why? Because they want to know where is the market at in order to understand how to move people towards taking the vaccine. So what we found was, looking at this over various points in time from last year to this year, vaccine hesitancy is very, very strong. And when I say strong, it's like intensely hesitant. Which means if I was to say, irrespective of supply issues and side effect issues, if it was available, I don't think people will take it. So when you're using that information, I can also tell you why people feel hesitant, and then that's where you make a decision to influence change. Most of the time, for this type of topic, the fear comes from not knowing enough information, and the different information is different for different people. So it's a case of, it's literally a communications campaign. Like, if you want people to change their behaviour, you need to feed them the information that's relevant for them in order for them to, to listen. They're not going to listen just by you saying, trust me, it's safe, which has been the narrative for a while until it became unsafe. So the work that we're doing is hopefully able to clarify, 1, where is the market at? Well, we're really hesitant. 2, why? And what can we do to shape that narrative? So some of the stuff that was coming through was like, we don't understand how a vaccine works in general. Our knowledge of how vaccines work, there's a science behind it that the general public doesn't understand. So you need an education campaign to talk about. Then the other element of, well, who are the voices of power and influence that we've seen in this? Is it government? Is it medical associations? Is it GPs? Who is it? Because you work with them with the right message in order to shape a change in behaviour. So that's where we're at. So in terms of if we had the vaccine available, my prediction is that mainstream Australia will not take the vaccine. And we've already seen indications of those above 50 also saying no, and it's available to them, right? So this is a really big issue because it links back to the economy, because without, vaccine rolled out, we can't open the borders. And Australia is such a small country relative to the world. We need international, tourists, we need international students, we need migrant skilled workers, we need, we're too small to sustain ourselves with closed borders. I hope that answers your question. Yes. Okay, perfect. Yes, you got it.
So I had a broader question about government and how government works with data. Do you think that more data would make for better government? Do you think more data would make for better policy? Or in a place with mandatory voting and appealing to swing voters, is it going to be a race to the bottom if you've got the perfect litmus test for every policy that you want to put out? You poll through data your population and you pander to swing voters. What does that mean for our democracy?
Oh, it's so juicy. Did we all get that question? Oh, that kind of lends to the third one, Scott Morrison, right? Oh, okay, this is so juicy. I'm so glad you asked the question. So here we are so your first question was, does government have enough data?
We know they don't.
Well, they have more data than we do. It's not about more data, it's about having the right data and the right method, right? So let me tell you a secret. I have decided to look at predicting the Tasmanian election this Saturday. Why? Because, who should you vote? Oh, betting agencies at the moment says the incumbent's going to be $1.08. It's not very good odds, and then the opposition is $7. I wouldn't. No. So when it comes to politics, it's very interesting. We've got two major parties, and they have a lot of data. And some of it is polling data, I've got to say. But they also have a lot of advice they have so much data that, my frustration is that whether they don't understand that this is available, that we could shine the light on connecting them closer to the population. Because imagine in a world where, if we were to say, if Maven Data could do a project with them and say, hey, look, this is what the top 20 issues are in the country, and then go top issues by state, top issues by electorate, focus on these, right? Then you might actually be relevant. That's my dream. But the reality is it doesn't work that way. And you're right, marginal seats do swing the election. So then we could do that work for marginal seats, but here's the catch. There's independents. And independents are more open to listen to this sort of stuff, right? So I'm trying to, or manifest, working with more independents in the lead up to the federal election, and starting with the Tasmanian election. Because if you have more independents in government, it just changes the balance of power equation, right? Because between the two parties, you've got a lot of game playing and politicking. And so to me, I feel like there's an opportunity to expose this sort of method and exposure to data, to listen to the people, with people who would listen to it, to the data, and do something meaningful. And they would probably, you've got independents who have actually toppled a lot of major ministers in the past. I remember Maxine McEwen toppled John Howard, and then you had Zali Steggall, who got rid of Abbott. So there's this sort of like dark horse play with the independents that I'm kind of intrigued about at the moment, and that is an into the government to help shape it, because to me, you would vote for somebody who actually listens to you, right? So I do hope that that becomes the new world. I hope that answers your question. Yes? Yes.
My question's related to the politics of it all, because as an economist and a political scientist, we never get rid of those hats. More of a challenge, more of a thought. Considering the strength of the Justice March and women's voice in the greater economy, the marketplace at the moment, have you thought about modelling what it would be like if Penny Wong was to lead the Labor Party before the next election? Because given the number of my female friends, and I happen to now live in the safest Liberal seat in Australia, which is Barara, Ruddock, anyway. Let's not go there. But have you thought about modelling that? That would be really interesting. I think.
I was waiting for somebody to answer that question about, if we were to put up the fantasy league of ministers, and I would look at it from both sides of politics. I have been thinking about whether I should take a look at that, because, so this lends to the third topic, Prime Minister Scott Morrison. So what are we doing with time? Am I over time? 5 more minutes. Oh, I better go squeeze this one in. Okay, so I was looking at if Scott Morrison was going to call an election, say tomorrow, would he win, right? So I looked at him a couple of times. If you remember in 2018, there was that leadership spill and it was Peter Dutton versus Scott Morrison because Malcolm Turnbull left the building. When I ran those two against each other, the sentiment towards them both were actually really, really negative. We just didn't like them both. We just didn't like Scott Morrison as much as we didn't like Peter Dutton, which is kind of sad, isn't it? So that was checkpoint one. Then I had a look at him again recently because of the Women's March stuff and all the stuff that's been going on. So his sentiment has gone from negative to super, super negative. Now, if I just stopped there, then I'd go, okay, well, he's not going to win the election, but it's not as easy as that. So I also looked at Anthony Albanese. And unfortunately, what happens is when I saw his profile, Alba's profile is actually really passive, balanced, mixed emotions, meaning positive and negative, but really passive. That's a danger. It means no one cares, right? No one cares. In politics, I believe that if you're not polarising positive or negative, no one's gonna care. So, put in that perspective, I'm not sure that Scott Morrison would easily lose. So then I went, I'm gonna have a look at some other pollies. So I chose Christina Keneally. Why? Because she's come from New South Wales politics. She's a female. She was very vocal during the March for Justice. You know, she's been quite vocal in the media, etc. And she's got a profile, and she's pretty much the right-hand woman of Alba. So I ran her name. And the public love her. So to me, I would love to be able to go, let's go and extend the Fantasy League bench and assess, you know, Tanya Plibersek, Penny Wong, all these other, and both sides of politics, and if we were to put together the Fantasy League of Australia's leaders of the future, this is who would be, you know, wouldn't that be great? But in reality it won't happen, you know that, right? So, yeah, I have considered Penny Wong, and I do believe, like without even looking at it, I do believe that she'll have very, very strong, if not stronger, positive sentiment than Christina Keneally. But the issue is whether or not she'd take the job, which is probably no. So yes. So we have like, what, 2 seconds left? Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up. And what I'm gonna say is thank you so much everybody for your attendance and participation. It's been such a delight to share stories from the data world that I see and supporting small bars here in Sydney. And have a good rest of the night. Thank you very much.